stops, you just go.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on LinkedIn today. It's great to see so many of you that I've been connected with for the many years we've been building the Data Connector cybersecurity community. We've worked hard to increase the value of being a part of our cybersecurity community, which now consists of over 650,000 members. But we're going beyond just conferences and virtual summits, and this live stream briefing today is an example of how we hope we can add even more value to your daily work and career. So let's get to it. The White House issued an executive order on cybersecurity earlier this month, as has been done by every president for almost 20 years now. Most of those orders created government agencies like CISA, and other orders change the way we look at regulations and in our industry today. And today we'll talk about the impact of this most recent executive order and what it means to you. For that discussion, we have Richard Steenan, a respected industry analyst who studied closely all of the executive orders we've seen over the years. He'll chat with my Chief Strategy Officer, Michael Hiskey, in this fireside chat sort of discussion that'll review the key components of this most recent executive order. Richard is the author of the Security Yearbook, whose 2021 annual installment will be published this Thursday, May 27th. He's also our keynote speaker for the Northern California Virtual Cybersecurity Summit, which takes place tomorrow and is open to every one of you watching right now. You can find details on how to register for it in the chat. So get your questions ready, because this will be a fast-paced discussion and it'll give you a flavor for what you can expect at our award-winning cybersecurity events, which have been rated among the top 10 in the country for the last several years. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Michael and Richard to start the discussion. Michael, Richard?
Can't hear you, Michael.
Muted.
I was saying the most interesting thing too. Thank you so much, Dawn. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to interview Richard today. It's a really busy time in the old cybersecurity space, and this is an important discussion. So thanks for hosting us, Dawn.
Thank you for being here.
All right, we'll talk to you in a little while. Richard, thank you so much. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started?
Sure. Industry analyst. I've been part of the security industry for 26 years, I think the count is now. Became an industry analyst going to work at Gartner, where I covered network security for the most part. And now I've got my own firm, and I get to do just what an industry analyst does, right? I write books and get to talk about the industry.
Tell us a little bit about the Security Yearbook that comes out on Thursday.
Yeah, this is turning into my life's work. I wrote a history of the security industry inspired by a big conference in San Francisco. And I kept seeing, really young people who were brand new to the industry, trying to get a feel for the industry from walking the show floor. And that just doesn't work, right? You've got to have the history as well. So I interviewed a bunch of the pioneers, Gil Schwed, David Cowan, a lot of people who built the industry that we know today, and turned that into a history of of our industry. And then this was also a place for me to publish the data I collect. So I've been working for 10 years trying to get a comprehensive list of all the security vendors arranged by category, and then collecting data on each one so I can tell which ones are growing, which ones are shrinking, which ones are getting more investment. Super valuable data set for me. And I published it in a printed format because that's kind of my quick and dirty DRM, right? It'd be hard for somebody to reproduce it and publish it. Though you can scan it and OCR it, but then they're putting as much work into it as I put into it.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I have a copy of last year's book, and I'm expecting to try and get my 2021 update as soon after Thursday as possible.
Should have it by Monday or Tuesday next week.
I love it. Data Connectors is the largest cybersecurity community in North America. We have over 650,000 members, as Dawn alluded to. We'll talk a little bit at the end of this broadcast what you can expect tomorrow in our CyberSec virtual Northern California Summit, which has just tremendous amount of information, features Richard at a keynote as our keynote. Without further ado, Richard, I want to get to the order of the day, which is the executive order on cybersecurity. So you've been a student of these things. Tell us a little bit about the history of executive orders, kind of going back just in a 20-second overview.
Yeah, if you think of it, executive orders are a way for the administration to get the ball rolling on certain things that are within their purview, right? The executive branch of the federal government, controls practically every part of the government that touches us. It touches industry, touches regulations. It's only, major laws that have to be passed to come from Congress. So presidents use it to highlight an urgent need. And unfortunately, in the world of cybersecurity, executive orders or presidential directives, which are another thing that's almost exactly the same, they tend to go, oh my gosh, we've got to do something, and we need to create a new agency that just will solve the problem for us. In the last two, actually going all the way back to Bill Clinton, the executive orders called for information sharing. Mm-hmm. And that's, for the longest time, it was everybody tell us the information they have about indicators of compromise and all the rest, and we'll take care of it from there. And very little going the other way. You've got the NSA and now the FBI and the CIA, they gather lots of information, but they don't share it very often. Through InfraGard, the FBI used to share indicators of compromise via fax. So they'd fax you hashes of malware, and you'd have to do something with it with no information about where it came from, why it's critical. It was just, hey, look at these things, see if you find them on your network. So they have a long way to go on information sharing, and the latest executive order from Biden includes that kind of requirement. But yeah, I'll stop there because I could just keep going for 30 minutes.
All right. So let's get right into the meat of this thing. What were you most surprised about in this executive order versus the others?
Well, the thing I was most pleased about was the first thing I did with this 8,200 word document is I searched it for the phrase risk management, because for the last 15 years, really it's what is it? Rumsford, the Secretary of Defense, came back into government from industry, and he introduced the idea of risk management as applies to cybersecurity. And the entire world took that on. Oh, we can talk risk management, so we can talk the business language to our boards. And yet, I'm not a big fan of risk management in cybersecurity. And this executive order doesn't mention it once. Although you might be able to detect that they just did a search and replace on risk management, and they replaced it with zero trust networking architecture, because that's kind of the new theme. And so at least it shows you that they're listening to what industry is talking about lately, even though a lot of people criticize that as a marketing term.
Now, 8,200 words, where does that sit in terms of executive orders? Bigger, shorter, longer, shorter?
Yeah, it's much longer. So the most recent one from President Obama was, I think, 4,200, so almost exactly double. And yet, it's full of good content, right? It's well written, very consistent.
Yeah. Chock full of good stuff. I think it was Mark Twain who said, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one.
Yep.
And I saw a lot of people do this kind of parsing word, because there was just too much information, parsing. And to me, if I could parse out sort of the repeated phrases, because there's a ton of in the next 60 days, in the next 90 days, in the next this much, or this agency will and that agency will. If I could just sort of parse out the repeated phrases, I feel like we would get it right down. But sort of summarize it for me. There's so many things that are 60, 90, 180 days. Give me a little commentary on that, please.
Yeah, and first of all, the preamble is beautifully written. Could have been written by a poet laureate, and it basically says that, hey, we're going to lead by example. The federal government should lead by example, which is great because I've been calling on that for years. And then it walks you through, the federal government will do data encryption for data at rest and data in motion. Huge idea, right? Something that was best practices 25 years ago. And finally, after all this time, federal government recognizes the importance of encryption. So we won't have things like the entire database of a couple million people who have clearances. All of their records are kept in clear text in some big data center that they didn't even know about until the Chinese hacked it and stole it all.
Right.
So that would be a really good defense against that. Now, mind you, data encryption is super easy in concept, extremely difficult in practice because you have to do a good job of key management. You can't just have keys, lying around that the Chinese could steal and do the decryption. The other thing it called for was the zero trust architecture. So now we're going to start doing good access controls, basically. We're using modern methods. And then it also called for full deployment of EDR, endpoint detection and response. So this is a kick in the teeth to the Symantecs and McAfee's of the world, right? And probably something that will juice up the opportunities for CrowdStrike, Cylance, Cyber Reason, Sentinel-1, etc.
So tough for the EDRs or good for the EDRs?
Great for the EDRs.
And what about my
Fantastic.
MDR solutions? How are those guys looking?
Yeah, so they weren't mentioned in there. And on the NDR side, that was what Einstein was all about, right? So Einstein was a whole bunch of network nodes deployed in front of each agency, and they would do IDS basically, and maybe some net flow analysis like NDR solutions do. And the zero trust concept totally sidesteps that. We're going to do away with the need for, connecting a agency network to the rest of the world and then filtered stuff like that. We're going to make the applications and the data accessible only by authorized people. So there's a little inconsistency there.
Yeah. And for all of those of you, please go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A feature. I'm trying to pay attention to them over here. Sorry for getting distracted. Please ask your questions as they come up. Richard, 60 days, 90 days, 12 have passed already, and some of that stuff is 30 days out.
Yeah.
Who's keeping track on the home version?
I'm going to keep track of all that. So I'm going through it now and creating a spreadsheet of all the days, and I'm converting them to dates. I found a little calculator that helps me do that.
Okay.
And then, on those days, I'll, and maybe journalists will use it to ask, during the press briefings, hey, what about this executive order? Where's the report that was done? Now, most of the short-term ones, we're giving agencies 30 days to come up, for instance, with new wording, boilerplate for contracts.
So that might not get into the public domain. That might be just
Right.
internally transferred information.
Exactly. But some of them beyond 90 days should get into the public domain, and we'll start seeing, hopefully we'll see reports. Now, mind you, I've paid attention to these in the past, and I've never seen any of those reports that, even when Congress passes requirements, they just never happen. And I don't know why that is, and what the downside is to not reporting or completing your task on time.
Yeah, and so here's what I'm a little confused about. A lot of big reports are asked for, right? And that's been happening in other EOs as well. Do we get those? I mean, by the way, if anybody of you in the audience have the URL for the FOIA link where Richard can request Freedom of Information Act for this information, go ahead and put it in the chat so he doesn't have to look it up. Are those reports getting done? Are they classified, or are they just so not interesting they don't even make publication, they don't even make it into the public domain?
Yeah, I suspect that I know they're not getting done, because I would see them if they were being published, right? So, but a lot of them are reports that have to be made to Congress, for instance. And in this particular executive order, the reports go to the Assistant to the President for National Security, and there was no requirement for him. I think that's Jake Sullivan, to publish them, but obviously he'll be reporting them to the president. And maybe some action will be taken.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see who is the president's de facto person. Is it the NSA lead that we're the woman he brought on?
Actually, no, he has not yet appointed I think it's a director of cybersecurity, but Congress authorized that right at the beginning of his term, or it was another executive order that created the role, but they haven't found somebody to fill that role yet.
Yeah.
So now you got reporting going up to somebody that to a chair where there's nobody sitting.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't create. There's not like a cybersecurity czar created or anything of that nature, right?
Correct.
So a lot of people are referring to this as the zero trust executive order. So we talked about zero trust. We talked about MFA. We talked about a requirement for EDR activities. Anything else high level that I've got to put on my shopping list?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing that came out of here is the creation of a National Cyber Safety Review Board. And this is something that's been called for at least since the Obama administration. And the idea, was, I don't know who first proposed it, but it's been around for a couple decades. So just like with the NTSB, formed, I think, in 1967, but its early progenitor was 40 years before that, in 1927. Yeah. When an airplane crashes, the world wants to know what happened so we can have trust in our airplanes. So we can say it's pilot error, or, fuel valve, failed, something like that. Right. That there's a pent up demand for that kind of information about what happened with Sony Entertainment. Mm-hmm. What happened now with the pipeline shutdown with the Colonial Pipeline. Right. And then interestingly, the board review process starts with a group that can be called together to examine incidents. And that group was called together the first time shortly after the inauguration to look into the SolarWinds hack and everything around that. All right, get down to it and give us a final report. The review board is actually going to publish that report. So I love it. Trial by fire, right? They're going to, not only is there a new review board, but they have a task in front of them, which is to review and publish the report on SolarWinds.
Yeah. So, and this NTSB type organization, has there been any precursor for that in cybersecurity in any walk of government oversight?
Not at all. Not at all.
So how that comes down.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the worst things that we've had. They've created so many departments inside agencies that do cybersecurity. They kind of vie with each other over, who, first of all, whose jurisdiction is it? Mm-hmm. And second of all, just rush to publish kind of thing. So we've always had CERT and CCERT, and now we've got CISA. This is a branch of government with 2,000 employees. Right. And, that's bigger than even Bank of America's security staff, right? Sure. So the question is, what have they been doing all this time?
Well, we kind of assume that the federal government needs 5 times as much staff to sort of accomplish anything we could do in private industry, right, which could probably be accomplished by one of the startup players with 5 guys, right? Yep. And a dog.
And a data scientist, yeah.
and Diet Coke all weekend long, just That's like right. churning the crank. Yep. So, one of the other things that comes along with federal oversight is money. Where's the money here? Is there new funding for this?
As this executive order has no funding whatsoever mentioned in it, not a single dollar figure, which is not surprising, right? The executive branch can't create funding, right? It can't set aside budgets and all the rest. So this is kind of a aspirational, this is what's got to happen. Next step would be to go to Congress and get money set aside or carved out of other budgets. And there's, with whatever the total budget is, $6 trillion or something crazy like that. They should be able to find a few $100 million to apply to security, or probably billions, I would guess.
Throw a few bucks into it. Why not? So key summary, everyone MFA, data encryption at rest and in motion, monitoring endpoints, managed detection, sort of a lot of push on there. Anything else in terms of what I might have missed that I want to make sure I see?
Definitely look at the definitions. Usually you read down the definitions and expect a bunch of boilerplate, boring stuff. But for the first time ever, I saw a concise definition of what zero trust architecture means to the federal government. And it's quite good. I was very impressed. They had some help writing that.
And the other thing you and I talked in the past, it also holds, the government's holding itself to a higher standard to be the poster child. Isn't that right?
That is what the preamble states. That's exactly as it should be, right? They should be able to get to a position where there aren't any breaches of federal agencies. So they're not in the news for failing and getting an F from the OMB when they do their security reviews. And then, lead not only our industry, customers of security vendors, but show the rest of the world how to do it too. And let, UK, Australia, France, Germany start following suit.
Yeah. And it seems like this is something that's been cooked up for a while. I don't know. Are some of the same faces in there, administration to administration, in terms of who's looking at cyber?
No. So practically all new people. But they're people who've been around forever or were in the Obama administration. So yeah, okay. So there's a lot of continuity.
Interesting. So a number of agencies, lots of interrelations. So we wind up talking to CISA and Department of Homeland Security, of course. Secret Service and CISA are sister organizations under Homeland. Homeland Security Investigations in there. Also a lot of mention of OMB. So it seems like they're controlling the purchasing process. Isn't that right?
Right. Yeah. Really big emphasis is, hey, there's a problem with vulnerable systems in all the code work and products that we buy. So now let's change the contract and say, hey, if you want to sell to the government, you've got to demonstrate secure coding practices. That's going to be the most difficult thing to implement, right?
Any mention of CMMC in there?
There was not. No. Yeah. So there was mention of FedRAMP quite a bit.
Really?
As there was emphasis on government moving to SaaS, and they actually mentioned PaaS and IaaS as well. So that's a cloud initiative. But to do that, you pay attention to FedRAMP requirements, which is kind of overarching.
Recognition that the world is moving to cloud and moving quickly, and the government has to be there as well.
Yep. It's the only way to go, right?
Right. All right, fair enough. Any parting thoughts on the cybersecurity leaders in our audience? Their boss passed them in the hallway and says, hey, did you read that executive order? What are we doing to keep up? It sounds like, well, we're already using MFA. We have an EDR solution in place. I'll be interested to see any new sort of regulations and standards that come out. Anything else?
Yeah, boy, if it's your boss, you tell me this is the time to up your salary because there's going to be even higher demand for what you can do.
Never let a good, I think it was Churchill who said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Exactly. Yep. And Rahm Emanuel repeated that.
Richard, we're super excited to have you here. Of course, Richard will be our keynote presenter this week, tomorrow, at the Northern California Virtual Cybersecurity Summit. For those of you that are not familiar, certainly you've been following Dawn for many years. We're excited to have this virtual summit tomorrow. We have physical conferences coming back on the docket again, which is very exciting. I think the audience has been asking for it, but who knows how many people are gonna get there when we get there, but I'm really excited to reconnect in person. After this week, we have another virtual summit coming up for Florida and the Caribbean. Really excited for this one, Richard, as we have the Lieutenant Governor for the state of Florida, who is also the head of Florida's Cybercrime Task Force, which is super interesting, as well as their CIO, James Grant, who's building a whole amazing digital service down there, and the mayor of Miami, who wants digital sand down there in Miami, and trying to build a real startup culture. So
Cool.
we'll see how that goes. I wouldn't mind. Interesting that we're talking to Silicon Valley this week and their Silicon Sands the week after.
And if it's live in St. Lucia, count me in. I'll be there.
Right, absolutely. Not only that, we also have, so tomorrow we're very excited to have a ransomware workshop that is on from government agencies. Now, this will talk about some of the recent ransomware incidents. Can't mention any of them by name, but we have all of those agencies, Richard, CISA, Homeland Security, and the Secret Service on tap for that discussion. And then after that, sorry for the jumbling up the slides here. After that, in next month, at about this time next month, we'll be getting together for the Capital Region Virtual Cybersecurity Summit, which includes the Secret Service GEOC on romance scams. So, not a lot of people, Richard, understand that romance scams are kind of a super important cog in the phishing, business email compromise, whole sort of life cycle. The Secret Service came to us and wanted to do a workshop, kind of a symposium on that topic to sort of make everyone aware, and certainly open to everybody who's joining us today. You can see the link for that there.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it should be a lot of interesting information coming out of all that. Richard, last final parting thoughts. What else should we look forward to in your keynote tomorrow that'll talk more about not only the book, but on sort of the updates across the cybersecurity industry? I'll give you the last word here.
Yeah, this is your chance to get in a very short time frame a complete picture of the cybersecurity industry seen through my eyes, I guess.
And instead of walking the show floor at your next virtual or physical conference, which you should do anyway, so certainly go kick the tires, talk to them. I find it interesting, Richard, that one of the biggest questions that our members ask other members in terms of references for solution providers, the first question is always, how are those guys to work with? Right? Not does it work, not, how cool is the tech? How are those guys to work with? And you could get a feel for that if you walk around the conference. But if you really want a good sort of compendium of all of that information, certainly Richard's Yearbook should help, and he'll preview a lot of that, as well as how the industry has changed over the past year in tomorrow's keynote. Don't miss it. Midday here for Northern California. And I'm very excited to speak with you again tomorrow, Richard. Very excited to speak to the rest of our audience. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye now.